Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to Committee Model Review Group. We have a fairly packed agenda today, so I'm going to try and get through this as quickly as we possibly can. No scheduled fire alarms, so if the fire alarm goes off, we'll all go out through the main door, and then out through the main doors of the building and down the ramp towards the library. I'll try and work in comfort break if I possibly can towards the middle of the meeting. Do we have any apologies for absence? None. Any declarations of interest? None. Minutes of the previous meeting. Any queries, questions, actions outstanding? Fantastic. Public forum. We have we have two statements. One from Dan Aykroyd and another from Councillor McAllister. Dan, is there anything you wanted to say in relation to your statement?
Hello.
No worries. Thank you ever so much. Just in terms of a response to the statement as written, I have taken advice of it quite hastily over the last few days. It was just to say, I think what we've identified through a long string of correspondence with the committee is an issue around the language used when ruling public statements admissible or not. And my attention has been fully drawn to section CMR 9.5 and APR 10.35 of the Constitution, which is one of the ways in which statements can be ruled out of order, or inadmissible, because of the Council's legal obligations. In essence, things that it's the list of things that are exempt from public disclosure. I'll be taking a closer look at them as we move along, but I do think the issue that has been identified, in the sense that the wording frivolous, vexatious or defamatory, which is used in a number of places in the Council's Constitution, I think it's fair to say, when those words are given their ordinary meaning, suggests fault on the part of the person putting the statement or the question to Council, and that fault is not there. And I think it in itself is offensive to the people involved. There are perfectly sensible reasons why a statement cannot be heard or responded to, or a question asked by Council, when it pertains to something that Council cannot legally disclose. But I think when that's the case, it needs to be absolutely clear that that's the reason that something's been ruled out. And I think possibly in the past, committee chairs, cabinet members, whoever, may have reached too quickly for frivolous, vexatious or defamatory, when what they actually needed to look for, to reach for, was that sense that it would be unlawful for the Council to disclose this for other reasons. And I'm hopeful that we can put some more detail on that in the conversation that we're about to have, and that we can come up with a more satisfactory way of addressing this issue in the future. I hope that's helpful. In terms of your previous questions, just to flag my own apologies, it's taken this long to try and get to the bottom of this. And I will take this one on the chin, I think. But thank you very much for your statements, and for what it's worth, just to say, I cannot speak to what was in the Lord Mayor's mind when making the decisions on the statements referred to in some of your previous questions. I do have concerns when there is ambiguity as to who has made a decision to rule public forum or questions in order or not, and that's, again, I said, one of the things I hope to clarify today. With that in mind, we will move on. Councillor McAllister is not present to speak to his statement, so we'll move straight on to the interim report to May Full Council. It's on page 10 to 13 of the agenda. Tim, would you like to introduce?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't think this report requires a huge amount of introduction. It is in essence a summary of the work that the review group has done over the last 6 months or so, and just covers off each of the terms of reference of the review group, with a short explanation as to what has been done for the purposes of this report. Obviously, all the detail is in the already published public reports, agendas and minutes for these meetings, and the report can, if needs be updated before it's sent to full council for the AGM following any additional things that come out of today's meeting, and the report puts down a marker that this is an interim report, and that there will be a final report in due course once the review has concluded over the summer. Thanks.
Thanks. Does anyone have any comment on the report? Any questions on the report? Fantastic. We'll move on to agenda item 6. Public forum arrangements. Tim, again.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a follow-up report from the previous meeting, which covers off the various matters that were outstanding in respect of the Council's public forum arrangements. So in summary, section 3 of the report discusses the key things for further consideration this morning. The first of which is the grounds for ruling out statements and questions, which provides the clarity in respect of removing one of the specific grounds that we previously had for ruling out public forum statements, namely frivolous. And that's part A. Then there's a few other additional things that we didn't quite reach consensus on last time around the number of questions and supplementary questions and how those may well be dealt with. We've confirmed the position in respect of the Chair's discretion around managing public forum, and also the way in which the time is allocated to ensure the equitable way of dealing with public forum. And finally, two additional things. One in respect of councillor petitions, which will remove that lower threshold for a councillor to present a petition, as was discussed last time, and also the publication of written responses for full council meeting, which is not something that we currently do, but should be possible to align with the practice for committees. So really that plays back the outstanding matters from last time, Chair. And I think as you've already alluded to, we probably want to start with the first one in terms of the grounds for ruling out public forum statements and questions that we've talked about a number of times in this review group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Reddy?
Very briefly, Chairman, I was just going to say I think the report faithfully reflects our debate last month, so it has my full support.
Fantastic. Does anyone else have anything on? I was intending to just go through these 4A to 4F. I have one minor thing that I wanted to address, but more than happy to, or prefer if the committee has anything to raise, if there is anything to raise. It was the only thing I was going to raise was purely in relation to the administrative record under 3A, just to provide guidance, as it were, that should absolutely include the name of the decision maker concerned. As in, what I want to try and do is to make sure that there is absolutely no ambiguity when public forum is being ruled in or out. In other words, that the name of the chair doing the ruling out is recorded. I can't see any issue or concern with that from anyone. Fantastic. Well, in which case, Councillor Brown.
Sorry, I've just remembered that there was something that crossed my mind when I was reading this paper earlier, and that is to do with when statements or questions are ruled out after being submitted to a committee because they relate to the business of another committee, whether it would be possible to have a mechanism that automatically refers that on to the next sitting of the relevant committee, rather than just a response to the questioner or the member of the public that submitted that, and said you might want to resubmit for the next committee, whether there could be a process for automatically moving things across to the relevant area.
I think it's a really good idea. I'd refer it to Lucy.
Thanks, Councillor. So my understanding was that what we normally did was go back to the person and say, you know, your question isn't suitable. We will, if you agree, refer it to and specify the date and the name of the committee. So we do it that way round. There might be the odd exception, so I can go back and check with the team, but that's what we should be doing. It's yeah, helpful comment. Thanks.
Yeah, if that's what's actually been done, my impression, I didn't know what was being done, to be honest, but if that's what's been done, that's great.
Thanks. And the only other thing to say on this was I do think it's one of many areas where our website could be a lot more helpful in just providing some guidance to the public to set and manage their expectations. I know that piece of work is underway already, but I look forward to seeing that outcome. Councillor Dudd.
Yeah, thanks. Just on the sort of time management of public forum, I assume we're referring to public forum in full council as well with this report. So it's good to see that the emphasis is on the kind of chair's discretion, and there's a bigger focus on maximising participation. So I assume the sort of fixed rules that we have at full council now, that everybody gets is it 3 supplementaries? Or is it 2? 2 supplement. So if there's, for example, there's 50 questions that have come in, the chair could take the decision, well, actually, we're going to move to 1 supplementary for that meeting to manage the time. So it's a more flexible approach. So that's what this report's outlining.
I think it's fair to say,
yeah.
My understanding of it, I'm pretty sure I'm right, is that in effect it takes what we've got at the moment and says minimum.
Yeah.
It gives, in other words, it gives the flexibility to the chair to say, okay, we're within this time, we're going to, for example, do this on rotation so that everyone gets 1 supplementary question. But equally, it gives them the flexibility to extend time. In other words, they're not bound by the Constitution, or at least they can't fall back on the Constitution and say, well, we cannot go further, which seemed to reflect the discussion from last time. So I think, yeah.
My only other reflection is I think sometimes the length of the answers that are given to questions are far too long as well. So I don't know if there could be some language in the guidance about making sure that responses are to the point rather than long-winded. We see a lot of those at the moment, and it obviously eats into the time for other people. So I know we're trying to say, well, we get loads of questions in from the public. It's really hard to manage the time. But I think the people responding to the questions need some guidance in terms of the lengths of the answers they should be given as well.
I'd be more than happy to add guidance to the roles and responsibilities of chairs along those lines. I'm sure that's something we don't need a formal decision on, but I concur. Possibly a little more heckling than the chamber would do the job, but we'll see. Anything else from anyone else? Councillor Stone.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, it's really about the supplementary questions, because you allow 2 supplementary questions regardless of how many questions you put in. Is that correct? I just wanted to make sure.
So it's up to 2 supplementary questions. So if you put in 3 questions, you can have supplementary questions on 2 of those questions. Yeah.
I was just wondering whether or not we need to change that and just make it 1 supplementary per question.
What do people think? That was the system before. Councillor Brown.
I mean, I don't think I'd be in favour of rolling back the public's rights to questions and reducing it back from 2 to... We increased the number of questions that could be asked. So I think it used to be 2 and 1 supplementary. Now it's 3 and 2. Or might have been 2 and 2 supplementaries. But I wouldn't be in favour of rolling back. I kind of take Kai's point about full council in particular, where there is obviously a lot of questions, and therefore, maybe making it clear, so the Lord Mayor could have discretion to limit the number of supplementaries in order to get through more of the questions, i.e. as a time management mechanism. But I wouldn't be in favour of reducing the number of supplementaries that people could ask across the board.
Councillor Stone.
However, if you're going to rotate questions, then it's going to take a lot of, like, you know, mental capacity to remember how many questions, if you're rotating through the questions. So if someone's got 3 questions and you're rotating, then you're going to say, well, question A, then B, then C, then you go back to A. Well, did he have a supplementary? Did she have a supplementary? So if we had a very simple situation where every question were given a supplementary, when you're rotating through to get through as many people as possible to participate in public forum, then it makes it far more simpler.
Councillor Dudd?
Yeah, I think the way I see this working in practice is most of our policy committee meetings, you only get a few questions. So most of the those kind of meetings, the member of the public will get 3 questions and 2 supplementaries. We come to a full council meeting when there's usually about 50 questions. The way I see this working is actually the chair's discretion will be actually to hear as many people as possible. I'm only going to allow you 1 supplementary so I can get through. So this is how I see the new advice working in practice. And I imagine members of the public will say, hold on a minute, don't I get 2 supplementaries? And the chair can say, well, actually, I've got the power now because the main responsibility is to get through as many people as possible. It's my ruling that I'm only going to take 1 for this meeting. So I think that flexibility is a lot better than what we've got now.
Councillor Stone?
Well, my imagination on this is that, so you will allow the person to ask the 3 questions, you know, obviously have remarks from the 3 questions. So they've submitted 3 questions, so we're going to listen to three answers. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, they get a written answer. So they're only allowed to have 1 supplementary on those 3 questions. And then we go to the next person. Is that right?
Just for clarity, because this has been an ongoing discussion for some time, and I think there was a concern that what we were trying to do was to set quite a prescriptive system for dealing with innumerable variables. There are different lengths of agenda, different questions could be coming in that require different lengths of answer. Depending on the volume of public forum, things change again. And our desire, I think, was to set an emphasis on ensuring that as many people were able to participate as possible. But ultimately, the decision on how to do that had to sit with the chair, because at the end of the day, the chair was going to be the one sitting there deciding what was best for the context that the chair was in on that day. Today, for example, we allowed 2 arguably late statements to be heard, but there was no other public forum. I didn't see any reason to rule them out. Just as easy to accept them because they were late. Would I have done that if there'd been a load of public forum? I don't know. But what I wouldn't want to do, I look to the different chairs that are on the committee, is bind their hands so that they have to do it one way when that way might not be the best for the situation they're in, even if it is the best for a different scenario. And I think we've struck that balance really well. I think there is the ability for chairs to do precisely what Councillor Stone's suggesting, whilst preserving the flexibility that Councillor Dudd's referring to. And I think we've struck that balance. If we haven't, it'll become obvious really quickly. And we can always come back to it. But I think for now, I think we've got a good solution. I'll ask Tim.
Chair, I just wanted to make a couple of practical observations from the sort of administration of meetings perspective. So if I take full council, for instance, we will work really closely with members of the public to identify, you know, which members of the public are planning to attend a meeting, you know, whether they're intending to speak, and then we'll work with the Lord Mayor to, you know, work through the timings around the time available for questions, the time available for statements, and it will be for the Lord Mayor, even at the moment, to have that discretion to, you know, we've got a gallery full of, you know, maybe 30-40 people, you know, half of whom want to speak, but they want to speak on a range of different subjects, and the Lord Mayor will, as I'm sure members have experienced, you know, say, well, I'm actually going to take members of the public that have asked questions about this, you know, because I've taken half a dozen about, you know, this other thing. So we do work closely with the Lord Mayor, and we'll do likewise with other policy chairs to ensure the smooth running of the meeting, to enable that, you know, that maximum, you know, public participation. So I think it's just worth reflecting that, you know, that there's a lot of support that goes into, you know, enabling that to happen in any of our public meetings. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. I'll come to Councillor Self, who's not spoken yet, and then unless someone wants to make a proposed change.
I just want to say thanks, Tim. You've reassured me that there is a process for making sure as many people can speak as possible, and we get a range of views on from the public, maximising public participation. I'd maybe be interested to find out, maybe looking at the statistics to see if there's been any sort of speakers that have come along and haven't been able to speak. A significant proportion of speakers going back to sort of maybe the Lord Mayor extending it from 30 minutes to 40 minutes, or have we always been able to accommodate the views because the Lord Mayor's had that discretion?
Tim or Lucy?
I do have some figures, actually. We did have a quick look at this. So just very roughly, we get through an average of 5 speakers within the 15-minute time limit. If we were to reduce the number of questions from 3 to 2, then we would go up to, say, maybe 6 or 7 people speaking. But in terms of the number of missed speakers, so if I just give you an example from full council from December, so we had 62 questions. We had 5 people who were able to speak and 20 missed speakers. If I take the smallest one in terms of number of submissions, so July 24, we had 14 sets of questions, and we had 6 people who spoke and 3 people who were unable to, and then the meetings in between, kind of variable numbers.
Councillor Stone?
I suppose in the way, so for full council, is there any way in which we can maximise the length of time for questions? So we go from 30 minutes to an hour?
Well, we are coming on now to full council rules of procedure. So let's deal with that under the next agenda item. We will move on to agenda item 8. Tim, would you like to introduce the report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is a report that covers the council procedure rules in terms of various matters relating to the administration and management of the meeting. For instance, you know, the timings of the meetings, agenda publication, arrangements for voting and debate. In part 3 of the report, there's a number of areas that have come up in, you know, various ways in discussions through this working group, which we've captured in the report around first of all the frequency, timing and length of meetings. So as you all know, we have 7 ordinary meetings, and they have a variable start time of either 2 or 6 p.m. and their set duration is 2 hours and 30 minutes. There's no restrictions on the timing of the budget meeting, so you may want to, you know, think about you know whether that is something that you want to review in terms of the timing. Then there's the next matter that I've touched on is the rules of debate, which you know we've talked about, you know, the timings of speeches, amendments, you know, the proposing and seconding of reports. But the rules of debate that we have in our constitution, a lot of the rules are fairly archaic in terms of the local government sort of traditional way of managing debates, which have sort of fallen by the wayside in recent years, and a number of those rules aren't used. I mean, you know, if we wanted to do a root and branch review of all of that, that's probably, you know, a bigger piece of work than, you know, we could bite off this morning. But, you know, it's worth putting a marker down about that if you want to, you know, do something more comprehensive in due course. And then some of the more detailed things around the number of speakers on items, the length of speeches, you know, all of which is designed at the moment to ensure the effective, flow and management of the meeting, and then finally the report talks about the debating of motions, which is something that clearly we've touched upon a few times previously in this working group. It's set at 30 minutes, but is generally extended in most full council meetings, so that both the golden and silver motions can be considered. So again, something else to reflect upon there in terms of how the rules look. So I don't think there's anything more that I need to say at the moment, Chair. Just some key things there for the working group to deliberate. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I have indication Councillor Eddy first.
Firstly, I welcome the debate we just had about maximising the flexibility of public forum. I personally think, because obviously we have policy committees and regulators, we have a 30-minute a maximum deadline, amount of time for public forum. I think we should retain that for full council. In my view, well, everyone, every member, every relevant officer should have read it electronically when it was sent to them, so they should know the details. So we should know actually what people said, what they've crafted, what questions they posed. So I believe 30 minutes is sufficient. Can I remind members, we do have business to transact after that. And it's important we actually allow sufficient time. We're not going to make good decisions if we have an hour of public forum and then quite a few hours of determination and debate. Regarding the frequency of meetings, I think they're about correct. And the fact they alternate between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. is fair enough. What I would suggest regarding this number of speakers, I think it's legitimate to go through the rota of group memberships. There are, in my view, issues which are not really contentious. We may not need to actually debate, but I don't believe that's determined best by constitutional tweaking. I think it's using the Lord Mayor's agenda setting meeting well, so we know what's not going to be contentious. Finally, length of speeches, I believe 3 minutes is sufficient. Short, but it is sufficient. Regarding motion time, almost every meeting we have to extend the time, so I think we ought to bite the bullet and extend that to 45 minutes. That being said, if it's normally the length of meetings is currently 2 hours and 30 minutes, perhaps it should be 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Eddy. Do I have any other indications? Councillor Stone.
Well, I think public forum is not necessarily about getting an answer. It's about being heard. And sometimes getting a written answer via electronic, people feel that they're still not heard because somebody sent an answer via electronic means. I think public forum is also about being able to be part of the debate, which means about supplementaries, which just means they come here to say, okay, you've answered me, but this is what I feel and this is what I think, and I want to be heard how I respond. So I think it's really important that we do extend public forum for to enlist the majority of people that are missed out, as Lucy Fleming has said, to the hour, so that people can be heard, especially in full council.
I would just want to make clear before I take the next point that I think what we've just done in terms of the first meeting would give full council the ability to extend, or the Lord Mayor, the ability to extend time of public forum on a case-by-case basis to enable more people to be heard. I want to check that that is the case. Is that entirely a decision for the Lord Mayor, or can councillors propose an extension of time from the floor?
So this is something that, in the case of a full council meeting, you know, could technically be proposed from the floor, but is most likely to be covered off in the agenda meeting with the Lord Mayor and the party whips, and I would have thought the same could be done for any of our other committees as part of the planning and preparation for any given meeting, you know, reflecting on the volume of public forum that's been received for any given meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Stone?
The issue I have is that obviously a lot of people don't, especially if it's a 6 o'clock meeting, is that a lot of people don't want to be here till 10 o'clock, and I'm quite sure there's councillors in here that would suggest the same. Therefore, if we're going to have that flexibility to allow the chair and or the councillors to propose from the floor, then we need to obviously start a little bit earlier, maybe start 1:30 and 5:30.
If I may, I think that assumes that the meetings need to get longer to incorporate more. And I have indications from Councillor Eddy and Councillor Dudd, but I do want to come in on this point. Because I did detect a reticence, right, when you proposed going to an hour for public forum, and I do sympathise. I do want to hear from the public more. I do think we should use that facility to extend time more. And I think that reticence comes from the sheer length of council meetings. And the reason that council meetings are as long as they are, in my experience, is the theatre of going through each political group making a speech on every single item, irrespective of how controversial, irrespective of consensus, the parade of speeches. And it's rare to get through a full council meeting where at least one person doesn't say, oh, the previous speaker's made all my points. And I always feel bad because it's always the same groups because of the rotation that it is. But it's true. The points have already been made. There are no further points to be made. But nonetheless, the time is taken up by the constant parade. And I do think, and particularly for motions, when we have so few council meetings per year, because the timing is so significant, time consumption is so significant, that being able to vote as to whether a motion requires debate or not would enable us to get through so much more business, would enable so much more to be heard. If something is uncontroversial and it's on the docket, to just be able to go, are we happy to move straight to a vote? Are we happy to move on? And I think would be good. I look forward to comments. I'll go Councillor Eddy, Dudd, and then Mac.
I'll be mercifully very brief, Chairman. Tim mentioned about it's in order for members from the floor to raise the request to actually extend public forum. They may, of course, but may I respectfully remind members the final decision is in the hands of the Lord Mayor, who has to manage a meeting.
Yeah, I just want to say I agree with Richard on this one. I think we are here to conduct business for 470,000 people. And it's good that some people do turn up and make statements and ask questions. And I think the fact that we give them half an hour to do that is probably in proportion with the responsibility we have for conducting business for everybody in the city. So I don't think there's a case really for extending that time. Although there may be a special occasion where the Lord Mayor might extend it, as has been mentioned. The other, well, I've got two other things. I think on motions, we always extend the meeting to hear the Silver motion. So, yeah, I think there's a case for just formalising that and giving extra time to motions, because we do it every time anyway, almost without fail. I think it happened once, didn't it, for the, was it the Knoll Community Party, wasn't it? So we failed to extend the meeting for them. And the other thing, I don't know if you can answer this, Tim. The number of reports and papers that we get that are just for noting, do we really need to hear them at full council? If they're just there for, surely full council should be there to make a decision rather than to hear papers that are just for noting. And if we're looking to save time and manage our business more efficiently, can we cut them completely, or is there another forum in which we can hear papers that are just for noting? Maybe a special online meeting or something like that, where you just here items that are for noting.
Just on that last point that Councillor Dudd has raised, so there are reports that come to full council for noting, but they tend to be the statutory reports that we need to bring, things like our half yearly audit reports, our HR annual report. So it's hard to get away from them not being on the full council agenda. But what is often done with the Lord Mayor and the agenda planning meetings is to identify if there's reports that actually need any speakers, and that they're taken as they are taken as read, and there will be reports that come to full council meetings that are just for noting and will just be formally proposed and no speakers, some of those that I've mentioned would fall into that category.
Can we do a little audit of those kind of reports? So the ones that we really don't have to hear, can we sort of take a view on what we do with those in future to save some time? Because I think we should be using that meeting as efficiently as possible. So if they're just through custom and practice, we've always done things in a certain way, and we don't have to do it that way.
Yeah, I'm sure we can take a
time.
look at that, Councillor Dudd. They are reported to full council because they need to be reported to full council. The question as to whether there should be or needs to be a debate on them is often a judgment depending on what is in the report. So it's hard to fix something hard and fast in terms of the rules around that. But we can certainly look to see if there's any trends or themes around particular reports that have come through over recent times.
Councillor Mack.
I'm going to do the thing that we've just criticised and say, my points have been made, but I'm going to say them again, also shocking myself by largely agree with Councillor Dudd. So in terms of debates on reports that are uncontroversial, when I sat as party group leader, I feel like I was constantly saying, do we need all these speeches? Do we need all these speeches? And a lone voice in those agenda setting meetings where everyone else said, we need every opportunity to have our 1 minute, 3 minutes to talk about procurement or whatever it is. So I would really urge other parties to strongly encourage their whips and their party group leaders to agree to have fewer of those speeches where we don't, that's all up to discretion in that agenda setting. And there has never been an impetus in that agenda setting to reduce the number of speeches. It was always really, really hard when I was there. I mean, yes, we can make a recommendation here, and I think that's helpful if we agree and make a recommendation, but the power is already in the hands of members who don't want to do it. In terms of the reports that come that sort of feel that aren't absolutely necessary, it's things like the Disability Commission, and there are a few things that would come that maybe are not necessary, but I think are absolutely important to flag. I had another significant point after disagreeing with Councillor Dudd, and now I've forgotten what it is because I've been so shocked by. I think I was going to agree with you, and now I can't remember what it was. Okay, I'll take a moment. It might come back to me.
Councillor Self.
So yeah, I think I agree with what's been said before from Councillor Eddy about the time of the meetings. I always in my head think that a council meeting is going to last for 3 hours. I'm actually quite surprised when it's in the paper. It does last for 2.5 hours. So, and I'm disagreeing with Councillor Stone about the 1:30, 5:30. But I do appreciate that, on the later meetings, certainly one wouldn't want to go on to 9:30 or 10 o'clock because we want to get home. So there needs to be a sensible kind of cut-off point in terms of time. I've kind of forgotten what I was going to say now, so I'll let it.
Come back to Councillor Mack.
Because I was agreeing with Councillor Dudd's other point. It is a very small portion of the city that come into this building, and it is people who are very engaged, who keep coming back very often and have that way of engaging. We actually have a lot of people watching on YouTube, more than generally than are in the room. The press reporter, and a lot more people will see it in the press. So I think the debate that we have, it's difficult to know when is it showboating, when is it for performance, when is it, let's try and move it towards motions that we need to debate and making that debate. But I think that that is important. That is how our democracy works at a national level and here. And I think prioritising time to have that debate on motions where it's necessary, you know, I think half an hour for public forum does feel about right for the number of people that are coming in to engage in that way versus the number that are getting the information through the press, through other means of comms from the debate that we have.
There are no other hands raised. I'm going to weigh in on this one. But I was just looking up March's full council. And these were the motions submitted. First one was from the Labour Party on 4 weekly bin collections, which we did have a chance to have a debate on and was resolved. We extended time, I believe, to hear the Silver motion on Young Carers Day, which is a very worthy motion. Very glad to see it went through with complete consensus. We didn't get to a future model of Bristol's waste and recycling services. We didn't discuss the regulation for social housing report. We didn't get to the closure of Park Street to traffic trade. We didn't get to an increase in employers' national insurance contributions. We didn't get to an EU youth mobility scheme for young people. We didn't discuss taxi licensing. We didn't get to recognising Islamophobia as a defined term and urging government action. We didn't get to tackling the growing knife and violence epidemic in Bristol and calling for national support. Standing united against racism and hate crime. Pavement parking. The importance of literary skills and reading, rent controls. Would have loved us to have discussed some of these things, but where there is concerted action and there's consensus on these things, I don't see why we filibuster ourselves to not getting to these items. So I will propose that unless a motion is called for debate, as in if there is consensus that something should simply be voted down, or there's consensus that it should be voted through, it doesn't need a debate. We just vote it through or we vote it down. And anything called for debate, we can then debate as before, using the rules as we do. But I think that gives us the potential to get through a huge number of these things and to take a lot more action. And I appreciate that there are concerns that if we were to do such a thing, that creates a lot more work at the back end. But what this does do, because of the way that motions work, is simply if something is uncontroversial and we want to see it happen, it moves to the relevant policy committee, as it would. In other words, it removes the requirement that I know the Labour members of the panel have been arguing for, of having motions going to individual policy committees, and it provides that platform for all members, all backbenchers to submit motions, and where something is uncontroversial, it can simply be voted on without taking up the time of the entire meeting. And I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Max. I don't think we should have speeches on reports either, unless there's a call for a debate or for speakers on it. I think we should just move to a vote far more often. I'll come to Councillor Stone, then Councillor Eddy, and then Mac.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for the slight debate on the hour, half hour, and I hear everybody, and you know, and I can see the reasons to keep it for half hour as well. It was just a suggestion. Going back to what Councillor Pulteney is saying and the chair, it does seem to me that it does seem to me that there could be some kind of compromise, and that every time we have this, like, and then the silver motions picked out of a hat. You know, I find that a bit weird, but maybe each political group could bring a debatable motion to the full council. So we're not always so there's no rotation at all. It's like the Labour Party, Green, Conservatives, Liberal Dems can all bring a debatable one, and we can get through the ones that aren't necessarily debatable through Councillor Pulteney's idea.
Thank you, Councillor Stone. So as in rotate by political parties the debate, as it were?
No, what I'm saying is that if we want to hear more motions come to full council, then why are we only bringing forward two? You're suggesting we go through as many as we possibly can, yes? That's what you were just suggesting? Because we missed this one, we missed that one, we missed the other one. That's what you went through the list of motions that could have been proposed for the last full council. All I'm suggesting is that maybe every group can bring a motion to council for debate.
Thank you. If it's on that specific point, please, and then I'll come to Councillor Eddy. and then Councillor Mack.
Just on the very specific point that Councillor Stone has made there, I think in your deliberations on how to approach motions, I think you need to recognise that it takes approximately 30 minutes to deal with any motion. So if you want to have, for each political group, a debate on any on a motion, that's 2 hours devoted to motions that would eat into the already sort of window of 3 hours that we factor in for a full council meeting. I think it's just it's worth bearing that in mind if you were to go down that route.
And fair to say an amendment would take that up to about 45 minutes per motion. So for each political group to have a motion, we're talking about 3 hours. And that's without, it still leaves us with the problem that the motions in effect are chosen by the leaders and whips. I'll come to Councillor Eddy and then Councillor Mack.
I suspect Councillor Stone's ideal is perhaps the triumph of hope over experience. I sincerely doubt, and may well be, that the groups don't want necessarily their motion to go through. They want to have a debate in the public eye and actually have certain groups vote against it. What I would say, in an effort to be helpful, I really lament and, well, I pull my hair out over the length of many motions. They go on and bloody on. In my view, the least you say, the more likely you'll get support and not division. I personally, in the motions that I've authored, I have an instinct to a model of perhaps writing them in no more than 4 one-sentence paragraphs, because I think the least you say, the least people can object to. It varies, of course. If it goes on for a page of A4, which is not so common, and there are huge different subsets and obligations and action points, then members may disagree. But I really just urge motion writers to be rather more concise in future.
Councillor Mack?
I think that this leads us into a debate about what are our motions to full council doing, how are we setting policy, how are we setting the direction of our work as a council. And so if a motion to full council, if we are attempting to set policy, or if we're attempting to put something on work plans for policy committees, I think that those things need to happen strategically. We have lots of opportunities with agenda setting meetings, work planning meetings, cross-party members on committees, policy committee chairs who meet and strategically think about. There's lots of ways to do that I think are strategic and considered and have officer input. I do not think that when we have motions that are often written for a political point from a party, often in our case reasonably short notice, trying to go round and round and back and forth making amendments to it, I don't think that is the way to attempt to set policy for the council. And especially though, we've spent a lot of time in opposition, especially when you are in opposition and truthfully you're trying to propose policy but you haven't had the briefings, you haven't had the information, you haven't had the opportunity to be able to write a motion that would set policy. So there's one side of it, is that what we're trying to do with full council motions, or the other side, which I think most of our full council motions are, to put a clear line in the sand to say that our party supports a certain thing, wants us vaguely to move in that direction, which is what they have often been. They've been a recommendation, they have been a statement of opinion, and if that's what they are, which most of us are, we want the debate because we want to stand up, we want to make our point, we want it to be clear what our party views on something, what it is, and for the press to pick that up, for the public to pick that up, for us to be able to tweet about it, whatever else, for us to be able to put it in a newsletter. So I think it roughly works how it is. I'm not quite sure what I think about the hat, pulling out of a hat, but kind of like a little bit of, excitement in that. We do the same for where people are on the ballot paper in elections, there's not much random excitement in our whole, so I think that 2 motions means that our meeting is at a reasonable length. It all gives us a few opportunities a year to get our point out there. I think that I would ask everyone to really, really engage in the other methods to get things on the work plan, to set policy through the experts in committees, committee chairs and officers, if that's what we're trying to do.
Councillor Dudd?
Yeah, I think it's probably about right at the moment. I don't think it's a perfect system. I do question the pulling it out of a hat, really, because it's not very proportional to the number of seats you've got. So you've got like a 1 in 3 chance of getting that silver motion, when obviously you've not got 1 in 3 in terms of the number of seats in the chamber. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, exactly. But I think for now, I think we probably should just leave it as it is and maybe formalise the time for the silver motion, because we always extend the meeting for the silver motion anyway, so why not just formalise it as part of the agenda, so we don't have to extend, have this sham of putting the extension of the meeting to the vote, really. And you did read out a list of really interesting items, and you did point out my solution would be you could put those motions to policy committees about what kind of work you want to see that policy committee do around knife crime and all the other stuff that you mentioned. That could be a motion to the public health committee, couldn't it? That a group could bring that forward and it could be debated properly in those meetings, rather than the full council, which is more about theatre than actually the nuts and bolts of a policy outcome.
Councillor Stone.
Well, which leads me right back to where I started from. Okay, so if we're not using full council for policy, and we're actually looking at it for completely and utter kind of like theatre performance of putting forward a point, then I would suggest we go back to giving the public an hour of public forum.
I think Councillor Stone's point is well made. I will make mine, but I'll come to Councillor Self first.
Yes, I know it can seem like theatre sometimes, and I must say I thoroughly enjoy the pantomime of sometimes like Councillor Weston against Councillor Renard or Councillor Mack or something, and it keeps you going through a very long meeting. But we do actually get some feedback from motions going into policy, and I know that my own silver motion on nighttime economy is fed into issues on the Transport and Connectivity Committee, for example. But I think in terms of I'm grateful for you reading out those motions. There's a lot of topics of interest in this city, and the thing that I think occurs to me is the sort of time we do spend on the statutory stuff compared to the time we debate, and we've actually we have a certain number of full council meetings. In my head, I'm kind of thinking, who should be having perhaps another 1 or 2 meetings, or how can we maximise this time to have these debates, and maybe it's to go into policy committees. I'd be interested again to look at these statistics of how much time we spent on statutory issues in full council compared to the half hour per meeting we spent on motions, and just see what that kind of balance is.
Thank you. I will make this point on the statutory. Statutory business full council is there in case someone needs to make a point. Very often something needs to be noted, and it's critical. And each individual notification to full council probably doesn't need a debate, probably doesn't need a speech, but it's there in case it needs to be. It's there in case council needs to go, wait, hang on, this is a problem. We need to do something about this. We need to take action on it. This is getting worse, and it should be getting better. This is getting better, and what can we learn from it? Those statutory notifications, I believe, are there for good reason. What takes the time isn't the statutory notification coming to full council. It's the need for every political party to give their view on it when they don't need to, when there's consensus in the room, when it's accepted that everyone will be voting in the same way. And not only has it been accepted that everyone is going to vote in the same way, it was accepted days before the meeting even took place. It is literally a performative waste of everybody's time, and it creates the illusion for the public that a meeting that's making decisions is making decisions. Those decisions have already been made. I will say it, they've been made by party group leaders, they've been made by whips, they've been made by councillors when they decide how they're going to vote according to that meeting that has already happened. And then we sit here grinding through the agenda of the meeting, knowing precisely what's going to happen, precisely who's going to speak, and almost certain what points they're going to make. And I do not think, and I think it's the point Councillor Stone was making, we can turn around to the public and say, you get half an hour and no more, because we value the 2 hours of that more. I don't think that's a tenable position. I'm going to propose a vote, because if you really want to vote this idea down, I really want it to be by formal vote. I'm going to listen to my own advice. I'm going to propose that at the start of each motion session, say, for full council, we vote as to whether each motion be heard and debated, or whether it just moves straight to a vote or not. Does that make sense to everyone? So we look at the list of motions that have been submitted, and any that need to be debated, we call for debate, and any that don't, we move straight to a vote. And we see if we can get through a little bit more business and devote a little bit more time of the meeting to making decisions, rather than talking about the decision that's going to be made. I'll come to Councillor Mack.
So just for clarification, is this that the agenda would include all motions, and does this mean that there wouldn't be golden or silver motions, that the motions would be on the agenda according to when they were submitted, or just to understand?
So for clarity, I suppose my proposal is that motions would proceed as they currently do. If you want, we can stop pulling silver motions out of a hat, we can have it on a rotation, whatever other tweaks you want to make to it. It's just to allow a 10-minute slot at the start to go, these 3, these 4, these 10 are uncontroversial. We just vote them down or vote them through without a debate. If someone wants to have a debate, then they go into the pile that's for debate, that's subject to the golden motion, the silver motion, motions as per normal. But where there are motions submitted to full council, where we know that we can just vote them through or vote them down, uncontroversially, then I think we should do that first and enable us to get through uncontroversial business quickly where it comes to motions.
Can I just ask Tim a question? Because obviously, you know, every meeting we're going to get the golden motion and the silver motion. So you obviously do a proper scrutiny of those motions to make sure they're lawful motions, whereas the ones that are just published on the agenda, I'm assuming you don't do the same level of scrutiny to make sure they're lawful, because you know they won't be put to the vote. So I imagine if we move to that system, your workload is going to go through the roof in terms of checking motions and potentially amendments to those motions and things like that.
So just to clarify, so we do review all of the motions that come in and give them an initial review, but that's done. That isn't done in a detailed technical way with, you know, for the benefit of, detailed legal advice, financial advice, etc. But there will, you know, we follow the principle in the Constitution that, you know, does it relate to, you know, or does it impact on the city of Bristol, which is the sort of principal criteria, and obviously we would look for anything that was, you know, frivolous, vexatious, etc., defamatory in the drafting of the motion, but we wouldn't go much further than that.
I'm going to Councillor Self, then Councillor Brown. I don't think I've missed anyone, have I? Self, then Brown.
What concerns me about what you're proposing, Guy, is that even within a group, you know, what may be seen to be maybe, you know, in your eyes not controversial, there can be differences of opinion, and so for every single motion, I think, you know, certainly in our group, we maybe look to have a discussion about it. And at the moment, you know, it's bad enough just to discuss two motions and come to an opinion and a group view on those. So I just don't think that's going to work.
If I may, very quickly before I come to Councillor Brown, but if that was the case, then nothing will change. We'll be exactly where we are now. There's no greater risk in it. It's simply that if someone does write a motion that's uncontroversial, whether that be positively or negatively, if it's uncontroversially bad, then it gets uncontroversially voted down without a need for everyone to say it's bad. Equally, if it's uncontroversially good, it can be voted through without everyone having to say it's great. But if someone can write a motion that doesn't need debate, then I think we should just be able to do that and get that on the business of that policy committee, who will do the work that Councillor Dodd suggests of checking it's lawful and everything else. I'll come to Councillor Brown and Councillor Eddy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering what your threshold here is. Are you saying Lord Mayor reads out the title of a motion, if there are no objectors, if there's 10% object, what's the threshold to say that that's accepted undebated? Well, what are you proposing? This is your proposal.
I'd be happy with a threshold of 2. If one person is proposing it and it's terrible, everyone else agrees it's terrible, I don't think we need them all to say that it's terrible to just say, right, well, let's just vote it down. It doesn't need a debate. But if 2 people think, oh, no, this needs debate, then fine, debate. It goes back on the list, and it goes back into the pool of ordinary motions. But I don't think it's unreasonable that if 68 councillors think something is a good idea or a bad idea, that we need to discuss why it's a good idea or a bad idea. We just vote. I don't see how that would be controversial. The only way I think it would be controversial is in the way that Councillor Self suggests. It would hand power to individual councillors that wouldn't be constrained by the whips meeting. Any councillor could put forward a motion, and it would be down to the political parties to vote it through or not, or decide it's controversial or not. But I think a low threshold would be fine. But I do think it would create a bit of an incentive for people, if they really believe in something, to put a motion together in such a way that they can change the policy of this council for the better, with consensus, with agreement. Councillor Eddy, then Councillor Stone, and then we're going to move to a vote. So we're running over time.
Chairman, your confidence in this proposal is fine if the author of the motion has the wisdom of the Almighty. Personally, I don't claim to do so. And over the last 6 months, for example, we've had Labour, the Greens, the Lib Dems, even us, I think, proposing improvements or tweaks which ideally are accepted as altered motions, but have not, of course. Then they have to come as amendments. So that goes back to Tim's point of actually the impact on the length of the meeting and proper debate, of course. So while I think your ideal is well-intentioned, I think there are some significant practical issues, and I'm not presently comfortable with voting for it.
Thank you, Councillor Eddy. I think Councillor Stone, I think that was the last one.
Yeah, well, I'm all in favour of dynamic thinking, which means that we do things and see where it takes us. So, but what I wanted to clarify is that if these proposed motions are, say, voted through at full council by a quick vote and no debate, then I would suggest that the second place they'd go to is the appropriate committee where there will be debate. Yeah, then that's fine. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't go for it.
Thanks, Councillor Stone. I'd say it strikes me as it meets the criteria, the points that were made in relation to the potential to bring motions to policy committees. It does that job, it just does it in a different forum. I think where it would probably be more useful. And I remember, I believe it was Councillor Brown's concerns around that, with that it would kind of reflect the concerns Councillor Mack raised in this meeting, that what you would potentially end up with is a load of motions, business policy committees being overwhelmed by motions, and that was why it couldn't happen. But I do think this deals with that problem. It gives ordinary members the opportunity to raise issues and raise and initiate policy in a way that is controlled, is meaningful, happens with the consent of this chamber. And I don't like the idea of filibustering it out because we would rather have 45 minutes of speeches on something everyone thinks is a good or bad idea. last thing from Councillor Dudd.
Yeah, I was just saying those committees would have the time to deal with those motions properly, whereas full council doesn't. So you're not really doing the debate any justice by bringing loads of motions to full council, because probably every one of those motions deserves to be debated to some degree. So if you're just nodding them through, I don't think that works really, and it should go to a policy committee where there is time to discuss those issues. But yeah, we don't have the right to bring motions to policy committees at the moment, but I think we should.
We don't, but I do worry that we're ruling out this option for an option that isn't going to come through. I have to admit, I do worry as an ordinary backbench councillor in every other respect other than this committee. How do I initiate policy? If I'm not on the transport committee, how do I initiate policy in respect of my ward on behalf of my constituents? Beg and borrow through public forum? I don't know. But I do think this would give me a way of doing it. Wow. Okay. In terms of the sort of other business of this for this agenda item, are there any other changes anyone wishes to formally propose? Councillors.
Sorry, Mike.
Taylor will tell me off for speaking without the mic. Several people have said we agree with actually formalising the extension of the time for motions. Could I propose we make it what I suggest, 45 minutes?
Proposal from Councillor Eddy to extend the time for motion to 45 minutes. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
All those against? And no abstentions. Unanimous. Any other proposals? Councillor Stone.
Right, so I would like to propose that we extend public forum to an hour because we do have a social contract with the people of Bristol. And I think it's really important, as we have debated today, this morning, that the public can and are and should be heard. And I think that this would be, a way in which we provide that social contract with our residents across the city.
All those in favour?
1, 2.
All those opposed?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Any abstentions? Any further proposals? I will put mine forward that we first vote on whether motions need to be debated or not by some process, as in other words, motions by default move straight to a vote unless called for debate. Is that clear enough for people to vote on? Do I need to add any more detail? So, in other words, a process by which motions are simply voted up or down unless they're called for debate. In other words, there are no speeches on motions unless people think a debate is necessary. They're simply proposed, voted on. Councillor Mack?
There is currently, you can call to move straight to a vote at any point, which I've been very tempted to do on various points, especially a big plan around the budget meeting and all the items there that we're going to do that. So I'm just pointing out that it's the opposite way round in terms of rather than an assumption for an assumption the other direction, but just to explain that there is an option to do that in the current process.
There is. I suspect it's not used very much because people would take it as a move to curtail the subject of the motion rather than the debate of the subject of the motion. But I suspect it's not used. But I think I might find myself using it more in future. Myself. Is everyone clear on the proposal in front of you? All those in favour?
1, 2.
All those against?
1, 2, 3, 4.
5 falls. Shame. Never mind. At which point we will take, let's say, a 5-minute comfort break, and then we'll come back to talk about delegations to officers after the break. Welcome back, everybody. So we are on to officer delegations, agenda item 9. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly on this one. So this report is was deferred from the previous meeting because we didn't get to it in time. It provides a very high-level overview of the delegations that we have in place for officers, and provides the part 3.4 of the Council's Constitution, which sets the framework for the schemes of delegation to officers, generally to executive directors and directors, and then there's various directorate level schemes of delegation that sit beneath those that will delegate those responsibilities onwards. And we also have specific schemes of delegation for HR and finance matters, and obviously there's particular delegations in place to statutory officers for discharging the statutory responsibilities they have. So, for instance, to myself as the Council's monitoring officer. So this is fairly high level, Chair. It had a detailed look at delegations in the original working group. But it's here for completeness as part of the forward plan. I'm happy to take any general or specific questions on officer schemes of delegations. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I have Councillor Eddy first, and then Councillor Brown.
In an effort to save time, Chairman, could I move we formally accept the report?
So moved, but Councillor Brown, unless Councillor Brown is planning on seconding.
I was going to ask a question, actually. Do you have discretion to make changes to this? I'm thinking, or rather, the Council is in the process of appointing a Director of Housing, and therefore the Executive Directorship, Exec Director of Housing, so therefore the breakdown of responsibilities will change. So presumably that will have to be reflected within the scheme of delegation. Is that something that's at your discretion within the overall framework of the Council, or does that have to come back to full Council?
So the overarching framework for delegations to officers enables changes to be made within within the whole. So at the moment we have the scheme of delegation for growth and regeneration, and obviously the housing element of that is now being split out. There is work going on to do that, but it won't change the substance of the delegations. It will just change where they sit. So yeah, and that is something that is, I think on a quarterly basis we review all of the directorate schemes of delegation in any event to make sure that things are updated, job titles are consistent with changes to roles and that sort of thing. But the shape of the whole doesn't change, but the constituent parts within the schemes of delegation do get changed and updated, when needed.
Councillor Dowd.
Sorry, Richard, it was a good idea to try and move this on. Can I just ask about how we keep an eye on all the delegations that we give, that committees give? Because there's a lot of them, isn't there? And we had the recent issue with the calling around the housing committee about the amount of money being spent based on an old delegation from the previous administration. So I just wondered how we keep track of it all to make sure that officers are acting in line with political oversight and sort of live delegated authority rather than something that might have been from about 10 years ago that they're acting under.
So Chair, if I may, so the decisions that are taken by officers that flow from a committee report or previously a cabinet report will be the subject of finance, legal advice as part of the decision making around those delegated decisions, and as members will be aware, those decisions are published as officer decision notices and are published on our website. So there's professional and technical support that is provided when those decisions are being taken and implemented, and in the interest of transparency, the records of those decisions are made public, and behind the scenes there's an awful lot of administrative support that goes into ensuring that we are complying with the various delegations that are put in place. The executive office team track the various decisions that have been taken and ensure that the officer decision notices are published in a timely way when officer delegated decisions have been taken.
Thanks very much. Question from Councillor Eddy?
Not that I wish to delay this item naturally, but in response to Kai, whether it was taken 10 years ago or a year ago or whatever, for example, to use the example you quoted, officers bring it to men or the chairman and vice chairman at the chair's weekly briefing to get a steer, of course, even if it's technically delegated, of course. So there is member involvement that way.
Thanks very much. Any further questions, comments? I had a couple that I just wanted to flag, but they'd be very quick ones. Councillor Stone.
Yeah, I think I'm picking up from Kai's point, because I don't really want to just see people going to a review of the decision, as in what happened in homes and housing. I was thinking, well, if these are, there are a lot of decisions that have been delegated to officers, and as soon as they are published, is there a quicker way in which we can question those decisions than going through a whole kind of like call-in process?
Alas, this was something we looked at in quite a lot of detail around the arrangements, the call-in session, in line with generally agreed principle of this committee. Nothing is decided till everything's decided. I do have a little announcement at the end of the agenda in respect of how we're going to deal with that problem, but that's when we might wish to deal with at that point rather than through this part of the process, if that's okay. But I agree with you. I think we do need some function for ensuring a decision is made publicly that's less extreme than the escalation panel process. Anyone else for anything else? My two were relatively minor. One was just on C15J, which reads to me incredibly broadly that all decisions taken by SIL Section 106 committees and officers, which would pertain specific to area committees, have to be consistent with the Council's budget and policy framework, which is obviously completely sensible. You can't have area committees deciding to make decisions according to a completely different set of rules. However, it also says, and in accordance with any policy plan or criteria adopted by the Council. I was hoping we could do a little bit of work just to tidy that up and just to delete everything from and in accordance with and just reduce it to all decisions taken by SIL or Section 106 committees and officers must not conflict with the Council's budget and policy framework. So, it's substantially the same meaning, but it doesn't mean that, for example, a decision to spend SIL putting a new bin in has to comply with each and every single policy that the council has about bins.
So Chair, if I may, I think the wording here is mirrored in our area committee procedure rules or terms of reference. I think the council's budget and policy framework has a very specific meaning and is derived from our budget and policy framework procedure rules, which sets out what that framework is, whereas the policy plans or criteria of the council are much wider, and for something like Section 106 and SIL, you would include in that things like planning policy and the like, which is not within the council's budget and policy framework. So they are actually two separate things.
I appreciate that. Does that mean that area committees are bound by, for example, elements of the One City plan, as in these grand citywide strategies that are very, very broad, in some cases quite rhetorical, that area committees are actually bound to abide by policies that are that numerous?
So the One City plan, for instance, is a city plan rather than it's not a formally adopted plan of Bristol City Council.
Could it say formally adopted policy plan or criteria?
Well, I think that's implied. Yes.
Could I just absolute clarification, but it's not the case that it would be any policy plan or criteria of the council.
Sorry, maybe this is something, Chair, that we pick up when we consider area committees at the next meeting as a part of the agenda, and I can give it a little bit more thought between now and then.
There we go. Thank you for that. And the other one was just on C3, the planning and development control functions, which obviously delegates authority to the Executive Director for Growth and Regen, except for, in effect, call-ins, where ward members have asked for a decision to be made by a planning committee instead of under delegated powers. Here it specifies that has to happen within the published consultation period for the application. I know that both custom and practice and actually the rules as stated elsewhere say that could be up to a week after that consultation is finished. However, it did occur to me that this doesn't in effect grant the chairs themselves the power to say this application should be heard by committee, which I do think should be there. I doubt anyone would object because that is exactly how it works now in custom and practice, if not in reality. And the other was just to change that deadline to enable longer for ward members to call in an application, just because the consultation period could well have ended 6 months, a year before it comes to committee. I think up to, say, 6 weeks, 8 weeks before would be fine.
I'm familiar with quite a bit of this, and to be honest, although Councillor McAllister raised an issue which I agree with recently about a set thing, I've usually have found there's quite a bit of flexibility there, and officers have brought applications to committee well after the time frame. So I think there is quite a bit of wriggle room here.
I concur. I think there's quite a bit of wriggle room in terms of custom and practice, but not in terms of the Constitution. All I'm looking to do is to formalise the current arrangement and to say that that should be the case constitutionally as well as in terms of the way that we actually do things. Does anyone see a downside? Would anyone disagree with either of those? Fab. If we could add those minor amendments, that'd be great. Oh, Councillor Mack.
Sorry, I'm sort of slowly thinking through this because it's not really my area. So at the moment, there is a deadline based on when the consultation closes. What you're suggesting is to change it so that the deadline is sometime before it goes to the hearing. Sorry, is that?
It's to give chairs the opportunity and ward members the opportunity sometime after the consultation is closed to say this should come to committee before the decision's made.
I think the problem is you're moving a fixed deadline based on when the consultation closes to a completely unfixed deadline because we don't know when the decision's being made. That's my concern. I would also say, though, I have been in a case where I didn't think we needed to call it in, and then we decided we did, and there was no flexibility, and they were not allowing us to call it in. So I've been in that case.
Councillor Reddy?
I do apologise. This may be fairly academic because the current government's planning reforms are likely to make the right of members to actually refer it to committee more difficult.
We'll just have to hope on that one and hope our colleagues can exert influence where possible. Councillor Brown.
Thanks. Yeah, I know the case to which Richard's referring, and I think there is a problem with the current consultation, with the current requirement for Collins to be. I think the deadline is a week after the first consultation period closes, but at that point you might not necessarily know the direction of travel of the councils or the officers' thought on whether to recommend or approve. You might not know all the internal consultees' responses and the bearing that might have. And indeed, there might be subsequent rounds of consultation which may have a bearing as well on your views to whether something should be called in or not. So whether it's through custom and practice or whether it's through something more fixed, there definitely needs to be a little bit more flexibility around that. And I think if I picked you up right, perhaps making the call-in deadline in reference to the proposed determination date, rather than after the first consultation period, might be a way to do that. But I know that this is an issue that has been escalated within the department, and is something that has been discussed. I think it's probably been discussed by the leads on planning committee leads, but it's also been a live issue in the planning department, and so I know that there is work, and I think there is a willingness to work with members to get an approach which is sensible and addresses some of the concerns that have been raised.
Thanks, Councillor Brown. Tim.
Chair, if I may, so I'm not familiar with this particular issue, but I'm picking up a number of things that probably need to just be considered in a little bit more detail. Can I suggest that we take this away as officers and come back with a very specific proposal around how we can put some greater assurance around this process for members, rather than try to amend this on the hoof this morning, and because there probably are a few nuances that I'm not familiar with myself, and would want to just get some comfortable around before giving you the appropriate advice here this morning. So if we could bring that back as just a standalone specific paper on that part of the scheme of delegation next time, I think that would be helpful for the working group.
Well, in that case, I think I'd say let's pass the report accepting C3, which will come back as a report next time, let's say very quickly. Everyone happy with that approach? Anything else anyone wants to raise on it? Fabulous. Let's move on to agenda item 10. Tim again.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a straightforward item that covers a matter that was raised fairly early on in the deliberations of this review group, relating to the decision-making powers of the Harbour Committee, which currently does not have its own decision-making powers. Any key decisions would need to be taken by the Economy and Skills Committee, which in effect the Harbour Committee is a subcommittee of. However, there seemed to be a mood for conferring on the Harbour Committee decision-making powers, and so this report gives the review group the assurance that is indeed possible and permitted. The report also deals with one other minor matter relating to the membership of the Harbour Committee, which is not currently, in terms of the councillor membership, politically proportionate in the way that you would expect other committees to be, and so it's proposed that the membership is modelled on the 7 councillors 3-2-1-1 model, and with co-optees also having the ability to vote on items on the agenda. So those latter 2 points are new in terms of they haven't been explicitly raised here, but they have been raised by the relevant service director with me directly as a way of just getting that greater rigour around the way that the Harbour Committee works. So that's all I have to say on this one, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. I will come to Councillor Dudd, then Councillor Eddy.
Yeah, thanks. I fully support the principle of this. I think this puts us on a better footing in terms of complying with the recent legal judgment on Whitby and Scarborough Harbour about the ring-fenced accounts and things like that, and in effect this will be ring-fenced decision-making as well. So I think in terms of complying with that judgment, puts us on a much firmer basis. I think the number of councillors is right. My only concern though is the independent members, the co-opted members on the committee, which I think they've added a lot of value to the committee. But obviously at the moment the committee is an advisory committee, and they're on the committee in that capacity and voting in an advisory capacity. My only concern is that now, okay, we've got this recommendation that it will be a decision-making committee, which I agree with. You've got co-opted members voting on matters that will become matters of policy and financial decisions. And of course, we're accountable because we're elected. They're not. So I do have some concerns about them voting in an official capacity. So I don't know if there's a way to allow them to vote, but their votes are just advisory, or potentially having a threshold that if it's a key decision, they can't vote on it, for example. But that's my only concern with this recommendation, that you've got co-opted members that aren't elected, that add a lot of value to the committee, but then they wouldn't be accountable for votes they're making under this criteria. So I would be happy for them to stay on the committee in an advisory capacity, and maybe their votes are advisory, or that they're below a certain threshold. Because I think it's right that we're held accountable, but somebody who's not elected, I don't know if it's fair on them, or I don't think the public expect people who are appointed to be making decisions rather than elected people. It's my only concern.
Thanks, Councillor Dowd. Councillor Reddy.
Subject to the views of Councillor Brown, I hope I can have some brevity on this item, because A, it seems we're pushing at an open door. Secondly, we might even finish our agenda, Chairman. Fully support this, but as Kai said, I think it's important we maintain the experience and the insight of the co-opted members. But I note his point. I've served on several bodies which actually had co-optees, school governors and leisure operatives. They were always non-voting, so they actually gave their insights, which was helpful to the members, but they didn't carry votes.
Councillor Brown.
Yeah, so I think I previously in this committee expressed reservations about whether this committee should be reviewing and making recommendation on the Harbour Committee, because it felt a bit like mission creep, to be honest. However, laying that aside, it is clear, it's now my settled view, and it's clear that there's a majority on the committee, because Councillor Dodd and Councillor McAllister, who put in a statement on this, are also in favour of the committee becoming a majority amongst the elected members of the Harbour Committee are in favour of the Harbour Committee becoming a decision-making body. I think there are some things that need to be ironed out. Kai has identified the key thing that, when this was first discussed, was my key concern, was the accommodation for the co-optees and the role and the voting rights that co-optees have. And my general thinking would be similar, that they're there for a fairly valuable purpose of providing expertise, advice, especially on technical matters, but not. I don't think, if it was a decision-making body, full voting members, that would not be, I think, right within the thingy. I'm in favour of moving it from 5 members to 7 members to get an element of proportionality back in there. Again, when I inherited the Harbour Committee role along with the Economy and Skills Committee chair, I was a bit perplexed by the composition of 5 members, which of course effectively meant that Richard, Councillor Eddy's group, not represented on that committee. So I'd be in favour of moving to proportionality, having co-optees, and moving to full decision making, and working out how we implement that as soon as possible, really. But that is something that I've had. I think it won't come as a surprise to my officers within the Harbour Committee, within the Harbour operations, that this is the direction of travel that is, I think the majority of the committee desire.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Tim, wanted to come back on a technical point, then I'll come to Councillor Mack.
So if I may, just on the co-optees and whether they should have voting rights or not, that is something that can can be done, but equally doesn't have to be. And you know, I think it's perfectly acceptable for them not to have voting rights. In fact, if I recall, the rationale for appointing co-opted members in the first place was to bring that advisory perspective to the meetings of the Harbour Committee, as it was felt that having that external expertise was going to be important. So, you know, whilst that was the view of the service, that they would have voting rights, I'm actually, you know, agnostic about it myself, and you know, I feel, you know, we shouldn't maybe muddy the waters, and we should just keep the decision making with councillors. So, you know, I just wanted to say that, Chair, just to support the debate.
Thanks, Tim. Councillor Mack.
Yeah, that was much of what I wanted to ask actually, but I would like to know if there were any examples where we do have co-optees with voting rights where there's budgets involved. I also just want to make the point now, I need to leave at about 5:02, so I do think that it is unlikely we can do the budget item justice. I'm just mentioning that I'm leaving.
I'll come back to Tim.
Just on the point that Councillor Mack has made, I understand that the independent members of the Audit Committee have voting rights on the majority of items of business that are dealt with by the Audit Committee, but won't vote on the approval of the Council's statutory accounts, for obvious reasons.
Thank you very much. The consensus in the room seems to be that we support the report except for the voting rights of the co-opted members. Tim's confirmed that we can, that he's agnostic on that. We can do that. Any objections to simply moving forward on that basis? Consensus? Unanimous? Fantastic. Let's move on. In line with that, I concur with Councillor Mack. I don't think we could. I think there's a good chance, let's say, that we don't get through this whole thing in the next 11 minutes. That said, brevity would be glorious. It took us 18 minutes to decide that we supported the report, but wanted to remove one element of it. So let's see how we get on with this. If we do need more time, we can always take more time. This was an item that was added following on from this year's budget setting process. At the request, I believe, possibly, of the chair of the previous finance subcommittee. But I'll let Tim introduce the report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this has been on your work programme, and we've pulled together this report as we've now completed the first year of the budget cycle. The budget and policy framework procedure rules are set out in section 2 of the report, which talks you through the key stages in the preparation of the council's budget. And then the matters for consideration, which we've touched upon at times in the review group. Firstly, around the role of the finance subcommittee, which we've discussed several times now, and I think there seems to be broad consensus that the finance subcommittee is there to support the development of the budget, but it's not responsible for the budget. That's the responsibility of full council ultimately on the recommendations of the Strategy and Resources Committee. And then the second part of the report talks about the role of policy committees, and as I've just mentioned, there's a clearly defined role for the Strategy and Resources Committee as part of the development of the budget proposals and recommendations to full council. However, at the moment there's no wider role for policy committees in the formal sense, although chairs of the policy committees are involved in the development of the budget proposals. And then finally, the role of full council, which is a well-established process, but is included in the report for completeness in terms of the full decision pathway. So really, for the purposes of the review group, there's three key elements to what would be appropriate areas for focus. The role of the finance subcommittee, the role of S&R and or the wider policy committees, and then full council. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Tim. I would urge committee members to have a think on what further information they feel would be helpful in order to make decisions in this area, what sort of direction we feel proposals should be pushed in, that sort of thing, if that makes sense, as in have a think about how you want to make this decision, or what would enable you to come to a final decision. If we can pull it out in this meeting, fantastic. We might be able to make some decisions today. If there's anything left over, it'll have to go to the next meeting. We've got Councillor Eddy first of all.
Reasonably content with the officer's proposals. I do think we need to reshape or at least redefine the role of the finance subcommittee. But that being said, I felt it worked fairly well this year. I would say I'm confident how the policy committee chairs are informed and answer to members at the finance subcommittee. That works well. I'm not convinced it would aid to discernment or improvement in the system by bringing it, the relevant service budgets, to the policy committee first. So I would urge against that. One thing I would say is, although I don't believe we can constitutionally put it in straitjacket, I would hope members would exercise some control, so we don't have so many group individual amendments in the future.
Figurative straitjacket, I'm assuming. As far as I'm aware, that's not something.
I had no comments on any of those matters, Chair. Say for we cannot articulate in the Constitution and put controls around the amendments process as envisaged. I wouldn't have thought that would be an acceptable.
Councillor Mack.
I mean, I agree with Tim. What you said is you wouldn't have thought it'd be acceptable, but in our motions we set an amount of time and we set a way of selecting priority motions. I don't particularly want to do that. I don't know why I'm finding a solution when it's not something I particularly want to do, but that is the way that we operate for council meetings and have a set amount of time. So potentially there could be an agreement to do that if we wanted, but I think I prefer what you say, which is just potentially an encouragement, but I wouldn't want to constitute that.
My understanding was from history that the budget meeting was required to go on till the budget was set, and it couldn't stop till the budget was set. No desire to go back to that, but my understanding was most of it was statutory anyway. The case, an awful lot of the budget setting process is simply dictated by Parliament. We can't amend it or change it. I have to admit, as someone who's not on a policy committee, I had assumed, I think, that the policy committees themselves had a much greater role in the development of their budgets than it turned out that they did. I'm still struggling to find where some ideas that ended up in the budget actually initiated, but here we are nonetheless. Anyone else for anything else? Councillor South.
Yeah, I appreciate Councillor Eddy's comment about amendments, and I was quite interested to see the way the Tories constructed their amendments all into one single package. As a fairly new member, and obviously the Labour group had several amendments, all of which I thought were worth bringing to the table. And we, in the Transport Committee, we have experience of trying to sort of bring amendments. I remember very early on in the Transport Committee, we discussed about an issue which we wanted to amend and tried to work out what the process was for actually doing that in the Policy Committee. And then you have the issue about the budget and the qualities assessment. Doing it on the fly wasn't the sort of right way to be doing it in the Policy Committee. Was at least in the budget setting process, it was all gone through sequentially, and so from a financial perspective, it was all okay. From equalities impact, was all okay, and so on and so forth. But it then becomes a bit disappointing when we as a Labour group tried to bring an item to a budget council, only to find in the next policy committee, one which the Green Party or a party has voted against, are actually bringing it forward to that policy committee. So this is I think this is the process of amendments is an interesting one for both budget and council meetings, which we need to have a good think about in terms of how we approach this, particularly in terms of policy committees, because I'm still a bit confused, to be honest with you, sometimes.
Thanks very much. Anyone else? Would anyone like to... Oh, Councillor Stone.
Yeah, I'd like to just, as we are discussing how the process of the budget meeting and the process of how we set the budget, I'd like to just throw in a couple of ideas out there, and maybe how is it that we can actually make the budget more actually equitable and fair for the citizens of Bristol instead of just having a balanced budget contest. How do we bring social value into the budget? So we have a lot of social value across the city where businesses and corporations have to input social value. How do we monetize that or make that transparent? How do we put that into the budget process? Because that could offset actually some capital. At the end of the day, how do we effectively monetize the welfare and the welfare of our citizens, not just in financial brackets?
Thank you, Councillor Stone. Councillor Brown.
I've not got an answer to this. It's more of a question, a statement with questions. The role of policy committees in budget development, I think, is interesting. And I was in a fortunate position whereby the measures which went into the budget, which are savings or revenue generating, were primarily for the next financial year and onwards, but had also already been through committee and started on the decision pathway process through committee. So there were things that my committee were already aware of and had consented to. So in that regard, it's not a typical situation, especially given that my committee's the revenue expenditure in my committee is quite low compared to most others. However, there was a point in this year's process where committee members briefed the savings within their departments, briefed the savings proposals within their departments to the finance subcommittee, and then of course a proportion of those went into the budget as a whole. And I think there could be a role at some point at that end of the budget process where things are starting to take shape, whereby policy committee chairs should be briefing all their members with regards to what is going into the budget from within their individual remits.
Thanks, Councillor Brown. Councillor Matt and Councillor Eddy.
Yeah, thank you. We had challenges with at what point things become public and the impact of things becoming public, and as much as I'm striving and wish for more and more things to come public earlier and be debated publicly, there is something really scary and risky about when we're talking about budget, we're mostly talking about cuts, and I've had it from the public in public meetings saying we don't want to hear about every potential cut, and if they're going to be politicised, I think that is really problematic for the public. And I think that how we amend this budget process is a question for about how all of the parties in this committee system want to operate. And I think that if we can have private meetings, as the finance subgroup was a confidential meeting where we discuss each and every bit, then if we could do that with committees, and if the other parties wanted to operate in that way where we were shopping things in private, then everyone could be more involved in the budget. But I think that really is a question for the other parties about how they want to operate. And I'm really sorry, I've got to get somewhere else, so I've got to leave.
Thanks, Councillor Matt. Councillor Eddy.
Thank you. I can only speak with authority my homes and housing delivery hat. I know we had 2 briefings, team briefings for members. I'm trying not to be party political. Perhaps it was unfortunate that one particular party who raised a number of amendments at budget time chose or were unable to attend those briefings, so they weren't as informed as other group representatives. But certainly, in my view, there was plenty of opportunity, and of course, we quarterly financial reports monitoring, and that's had full member involvement.
Thanks, Councillor Reddy. I'll end on a question. In terms of the point that Councillor Mack raised, so who does sign off the budget proposals that go in the consultation currently? Is that the finance subgroup? No. Who is it? Who does it?
So the budget consultation last year really touched on one thing, which was the council tax. There weren't any other material items in the council's budget consultation that went out late October, early November last year. That will have been the subject of consideration by the leader of the council and the policy committee chairs as part of the internal working on those on the consultation, which is similar to how it's been done in previous years with the cabinet and the mayor. So we've replicated a similar model for the budget consultation.
So in respect to the point that Councillor Mack raises around hares being set running and people being very concerned about proposed savings, that was a delegated decision then? As in, is that a delegated decision which officers made in consultation with the committee chairs?
So the going out to public consultation isn't a decision per se. It's just it's an administrative part of the process for the development of the council's budget. The point that was raised by Councillor Mack relating to savings is slightly different in the sense that the savings proposals were worked up by officers over the course of last summer and autumn, and shared with the policy chairs. And the point that Councillor Mack was making was, once those had got to a point of sufficient development, how could they be shared on a confidential basis, on a wider cross-party basis, out with the finance subgroup, which that's not strictly speaking a constitutional matter. That's more a ways of working, cross-party working. And how we how wider members are brought into the discussions at an earlier stage, which I think is the point that Councillor Mack was making.
That's great, thanks. In the interest of finishing on time then, but if someone wants to add or say we don't need that, great. But in terms of the next meeting then, under the suggestions under 4A, should there be a role for all policy committees as part of the budget development process? I think having some options as to how they could be at that sort of assessment of budget proposal stage seems to be something that people seem to be in favour of. Having more information on, not doing, having suggestions.
With respect, I think I and other members have said there have been actually some Teams meetings arranged for all committee members to discuss the proposed new financial budget. Obviously, that's less formal. It's not a meeting held in public, but I would encourage members to participate and attend, but we can't force them to do so.
If only to clarify that opportunity is there already under A. The role of the Finance Subcommittee should be clarified as set out in this report. Would welcome suggestions between now and the next meeting as to any additional roles that people think the Finance Subcommittee might wish to take on, or any current responsibilities it has that people think should be put elsewhere. And are there any changes to the role of full council in the process for budget setting meeting? I'm not detecting any appetite for changing that process. So it sounds like those are our focuses for decision next time, should be relatively quick. No notes of disagreements, finishing dead on 12 o'clock. Thank you very much. Oh, no, sorry, we're not, because I've got one final thing to mention. So, at the next meeting, we'll be talking about area committees, I believe. Am I right?
That's correct, yeah.
Following that meeting, I have asked officers to begin the process of booking in a longer briefing agenda setting meeting, in effect, call it a workshop, call it whatever you'd like, ahead of the final meeting to decide our recommendations to full council. In other words, a much longer briefing setting, agenda setting, workshop style meeting to go over everything that we've done, figure out how it all works together, and see if there are any, in other words, that it's not over till it's over. Well, it's going to be over. So we need to make sure that all of it actually links up and does what we're hoping now that we've got a bigger picture of it in the round. Is that acceptable to everybody? Does that make sense? So if, in other words, I'd say, if suggestions, proposals, concerns, whatever else aren't raised prior to that workshop meeting, we're not going to have time to look at them, consider them, discuss them. It's whatever comes out of that workshop will form our final recommendation to full council, so that's our deadline. I'll leave it there, slightly over time, but not too much. Thanks ever so much, everybody. See you next time.